Over the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've concentrated on future energy, future waste, or future cities, food, but today it's biodiversity. The goal isn't to go back and throw blame at people, but it's to look ahead, identify other ways of living, other ways of designing our world, other ways of working, other ways that our universities and our students, who are the beating heart of those, can solve biodiversity problems. And when I talk about us, it is all of us. This isn't just an issue for Algeria or the UK, because climate change and biodiversity challenges are a global issue. But we are focusing today on Algeria. And it's the universities and colleges and the students and the teachers and lecturers and researchers in Algerian universities that we're speaking with today. What is it that you can do in your university? You might be a student and feel you can do nothing. We hope at the end of today, you will feel empowered, informed, and committed to taking action to help your university become more biodiversity friendly, but also more sustainable. And there is a biodiversity issue in Algeria. A report updated only this month by the Algerian General Directorate of Forests, DGF, indicates that 51% of Algeria's floral diversity is threatened with extinction. And the DGF points an accusing finger at deforestation, urbanization, a low proportion of Algerian nature reserves. It's only 0.007% of the national territory. But Algerian biodiversity is immensely rich, with approximately 16,000 known species overall. And what's more, Algeria's Sahara hosts a huge diversity of ecosystems, much of which are still unknown. So, what can staff and students in Algerian universities do to protect what still exists and stop and ideally reverse the biodiversity decline? What can we learn from other parts of the world, and in particular, the United Kingdom? We have 4 great panelists today. Each has 5 minutes to put out their stall and give us their insight into biodiversity and how we can do something about that.
Future biodiversity is the theme of this presentation, and the question that was put up was: the world's plants and animals are in crisis, pushed to the edge of extinction by people and our consumption. So why should we care? Well, I'd like to turn that around and say human security and opportunity are pushed to extinction because the world's plants, animals, microbes, and ecosystems are in crisis. So what opportunities does that open for university students, research, learning, and campuses? Now, I'm going to start by saying, what is nature? That may seem a pretty obvious question, but the way we think about nature has particularly changed over the millennia. Well, actually, over recent decades. Going back to Georgina Mace's paper, Food Conservation, she plots a paradigm of nature for itself, pretty much up to the 1960s, when conservation was framed as nature being out there on its own without humans. That's the way we thought of nature. Moving to the 70s and 80s, we saw increasing problems caused for nature by human encroachment. So Georgina's paradigm of nature despite people. Your phone going and everything, yeah, sorry about that. And then move to the 90s, and we have a paradigm of nature for people. This was the era of ecosystem services coming online, coming into the political and scientific perspective. The idea that nature does many things for us, the paradigm of ecosystem services particularly. And then Georgina moved into a paradigm of nature and people, recognizing that we and nature are exactly the same. We are all linked in a mutually interdependent socio-ecological system. So we are nature. Nature does affects us. What we do to nature, again, comes back to influence us. Now, the most important thing here, the most important idea of the latest paradigm is that nature is in everything we do. If we plan a railway line, for example, and it cuts across a drainage line, it floods. It sounds very obvious, but I can show you many railway lines around the UK that just ignore this simple fact. Every aspect of our business, of our industry, has a metabolism. It consumes, it excretes. And we fail to think about that in the way that industrial development happened since a couple of centuries ago. But everything has a deep interdependence. Global trade. I'm just going to pick up on the idea of virtual water you may have heard of. In the UK, the average per capita consumption is something like 140 litres per person per day. And yet in the products we consume, wood, metal, timber, rice, many other products that we take day to day, we consume about 4,500 litres of water. And that water is effectively imported from around the planet to serve our livelihoods. Even defence. We have a Ministry of Defence which has a strategic research arm that looks out to security threat 30 years hence. And in its latest projection of those 30 years, it mentions water 228 times. I said that to the MOD and they sort of didn't believe me. They went and counted it themselves. So the security of natural resources is as much to do with peacekeeping, conflict resolution, as is anything that involves military might. So nature, biodiversity is everywhere. And the way we plan a campus, we might want to bring in more pollinators, we might want to have natural drainage, green infrastructure, and so forth. But actually, metabolism of the buildings, people, the way we travel, the materials we consume is as much about our relationship with biodiversity, with nature, as the plants and animals and bugs on the campuses. Of course, we've now entered the UN decade on ecosystem restoration. You can follow that link. And this is about paradigm change in this decade to try and bring more of this ecosystem embeddedness into everything we do, from transport, defense, to trade, to industry, to education. And our education should be thinking in these very connected ways. I'm just going to flash up a couple of resources you might follow. A book of mine, Rebuilding the Earth, which is about embedding ecosystems into every aspect of our lives, and a special edition of Environmental Scientist that is freely accessible, that begins to unpick some of that stuff. Not only is the campus generating and regulating floodwater, it's affecting the hydrology of the whole place, it's hosting pollinators, it's benefiting from food flows from wider countryside. We need to think in terms of the mapping of how the campus, how your lifestyle effectively is deeply integrated with whole wide ecosystems that can be global. You know, when you buy a product off eBay that's come from China, Chinese ecosystems have gone into the making of that. So we have deep and multi-level relationships with ecosystems from the local to the planetary scale.
So I'm here to talk about nature-based solutions today. It's a term you may or may not have heard. It's never been so prominent in the political and business agenda as it is at the moment. So we have an extraordinary opportunity at the moment to fight for biodiversity through this concept of nature-based solutions. So to put it simply, nature-based solutions involves working with nature to address societal challenges to provide benefits for both human well-being and biodiversity, as Mark highlighted in his presentation before. But specifically, they involve the protection, the restoration, and the management of working lands and of natural and semi-natural ecosystems. That includes the sustainable management of working lands and aquatic ecosystems. It also includes the creation of ecosystems in urban areas, what you may come across as blue-green infrastructure when you look it up. It involves all ecosystems, so we're talking about kelp forest, wetland restoration, seagrass, as well as agroforestry and urban ecosystems. The concept of NBS is grounded in the understanding that ecosystems support societies in multiple ways. For example, food and water security, or storing carbon, or protection from climate extremes. But whilst the ultimate goal of nature-based solutions is to support sustainable development, it's important to understand here that the ecosystems that can provide these multiple services need to be healthy, biodiverse ecosystems. And this will allow them to be sustained over the long term. So biodiverse ecosystem will have a lot of complex ecosystem functions that allow it to be more resilient in the face of a rapidly changing climate, or of pest attack, or drought and fire. So that's what we're looking for here. And that's really the catch I want to talk about today, because the extent to which nature brings benefits to brings the benefits we need depends on how we invest in these and how we implement these nature-based solutions. What I'm talking about clearly is that investing in some projects, such as cheap carbon offsets, may result in large-scale plantation forests. And these can have negative outcomes for biodiversity. For example, if you plant a monoculture plantation, in some cases we're replacing healthy savannas or even healthy rainforests with monoculture plantations to increase carbon sequestration. Next slide. So these are some results, the latest estimates from a model, a famous model developed by Bronson Griscom in 2017 and his team. And the figures shows that the partitioning of cost-effective mitigation potential comes from, so nature-based solutions in this case is estimated to provide about 10 gigatons of CO2 per year in terms of reduction of emissions, so to avoiding emissions and enhancing sinks. Half of it comes from avoiding emissions, as you can see here, and half of it comes from enhancing sinks. And that's the equivalent approximately to the agricultural sector's emissions globally per year. Restoring native cover, this restoration of forests, contributes a small portion of the total benefits, mitigation benefits we can get from nature-based solutions. So there has been a really strong focus on replanting forests and restoring forests in the past few years. But we need to put this into perspective and recognize that only 20% of this total figure comes from restoring ecosystems in general. And in terms of how much land is needed to achieve this, the land that we get from protecting intact lands is there. It's already used as forests, wetlands, etc. The land that we take for managing working lands is also already there. We're already using these lands for agricultural purposes, and it's a matter of improving the management of these lands. And only 20% of this comes, that's 678 million hectare, comes from restoring native cover. It's just important to think about where the land comes from when you're trying to offset emissions by planting trees. That's the kind of message I'm trying to get to. So there's still a lot of confusion. I hope I can have a few minutes to explain this. There's still a lot of confusion about the contribution of ecosystem-based projects to mitigating climate change. Some have said it's the best, tree planting is the best solution to climate change. Others say it's a dangerous distraction. So to try to address this, I've worked with colleagues recently on how much can contribute to limiting peak warming to well below 2 degrees this century, whilst pursuing efforts to limit peak warming to 1.5 degrees C. And as you may know, this is the aim of the Paris Agreement. So let's put it in a context that's relevant to the Paris Agreement in terms of warming rather than in terms of emissions reductions. And when we do this, I know this is a bit technical, but I have the key message that come from here are that these are the IPCC scenarios. So they're taken directly, the straight lines are the models that come from the IPCC. It's the first figure you see in the IPCC. You have these different scenarios, one of which where our global warming peaks. So in the gray line, our global warming peaks at 1.5 degrees C in 2055. So if we reach net zero by 2055, we'll peak at 1.5 degrees C and then go down. And then in the dashed line, you can see here we've added nature-based solutions to the scenario. And when you add nature-based solutions, the key messages I have here are that in a scenario where we peak at 1.5, we could reduce this warming by 0.1 degrees C in the short term, so by the time we reach 2055. But the contribution of nature-based solutions is much bigger. If you look up to the end of the century, you can see that the contribution of nature-based solutions to reducing warming, to our planetary cooling, is much, much bigger. So that's how we highlight the importance of investing in solutions that are ecologically sound, that are socially just, and economically viable for the long term. We are really focusing on ecosystems, local ecosystems, and ecosystems that will be resilient in the face of the challenges ahead. So be it drought and increase in fire. If you plant a forest in an area that is a dry grassland that is used to being in a fire-prone system, so that will recover from regular fire, the forest won't survive in the long run, and you won't get the carbon benefits or the other multiple benefits, the water regulation or benefits to society that you're looking for. On the contrary, if you let the ecosystem, the natural ecosystem, thrive, you will have a more resilient system in the face of pest attack or fire or drought.
Yeah, I've worked at the University of Leeds now for nearly 15 years. And I guess really I've come from a practical background, really. My background is farming and agriculture traditionally, and conservation management. So it's not academic at all. So my approaches that I take to this kind of work are normally quite sort of hands-on and trying to find solutions on the ground. And like I say, I've worked at the university for 15 years, and in that time we've made some really bold commitments, and we continue to do so. One of which was to become exemplars of urban biodiversity. And when we made that commitment, really, it was kind of recognizing that cities and urban centres have very different challenges for biodiversity, and that we need to address them separately. And we really wanted to try and sort of lead the way with this. So, I mean, we had lots of different projects underway, but one that I'd really like to talk about today is one that we launched a couple of years ago, which is our urban biodiversity monitoring programme. So this is where we took a living lab approach. So we took academic ideas and thoughts and put them into operational, a way of delivering on the ground, really. And we do that through students. Now, the reason why we took this approach was because what we really wanted to do was help our operational staff understand how they can manage the campus more efficiently. So we have a 200-acre city centre campus that has lots of different requirements on it, with lots of buildings that are listed, really sort of amazing architecture, but at the same time it creates challenges for how we can manage biodiversity. So we appointed a group of students who we call them student ambassadors, and our student ambassadors really were put in place first of all to kind of monitor where the pollinators were working on the campus, to try and kind of look at how we could then feed that back to our operations to make sure that when we're planting and when we're managing the landscape, we do it in a way that helps to improve pollinators. And as we developed this project, we realized that the methodology that we applied was transferable across any species. It didn't have to just be for pollinators. And we also realized that actually it's not site specific either. So it's a methodology that can be applied in anywhere in the world. And so the students created this methodology based on 1 kilometre transects through the campus. And I suppose really now they've got to a point where anybody can pick up the program and have a go. So this makes this very transferable across any discipline. So our staff can go out at lunchtime and do a bit of monitoring, and they might, depending on their level of knowledge, they can go out and they can say they've seen a bird, or they can go out and say they've seen a particular species of bird, or they can tell us they've seen a particular species of bird around a particular plant. So depending on where they want to learn, the level they want to learn at, the system kind of adapts for their knowledge, I suppose, really. And then we realized we could then apply this to the citizens of the city as well, so anybody can pick this up and use it. And our students have now, I mean, they've developed this so that it can be used by anybody, and it's been shared with Osaka University, Penn State University. They've presented for the UN Club of Rome Climate Youth Summit. They're presenting for the International Sustainable Campus Network. They've just won an award for this program. And really, the reason why I'm talking about this one is because it's a great example of where anybody can get involved and anybody can kind of pick up the tools and learn about biodiversity. So it's not border specific. It doesn't rely on any sort of global borders, really. Anybody can use this program. So that's the main one I was going to talk about. And then the second one really kind of links to that. It's where on the outside of our city, we've got a huge sports facility. And we've just given over a big portion of that land to a large city flood alleviation scheme. So it's where we're looking at natural flood defence for the city. So a few years ago, Leeds experienced some quite nasty flooding in the city, and the Environment Agency and the City Council kind of recognised this and have launched a massive natural flood management programme in the north of the city, where they've planted thousands of trees, and the university's given up a large portion of land to do this as well. But rather than just kind of planting the trees, we've also linked that into our research so that our academics can learn from that as we go. And we're not just looking at the flood alleviation, we're also monitoring, because it's close to a very busy ring road. We're monitoring the air quality and how that improves, the carbon capture of the trees. We're also looking at the way that the outside of a city is different from the inside of a city, and how those small changes can affect the way you apply herbicides or whatever it might be as farmers. So it's all transferable information. And then to further that project even further along, our pollinator ambassadors are now coming in and actually rolling their program out on that site as well, so the local community can get involved. So yeah, so it's kind of, I guess it's really what I'm wanting to get across is that biodiversity has to be accessible, and what we're trying to do here is make it that anybody can pick up the tools and anybody can have a go. You don't have to be a specialist, and you don't need, I mean, obviously we'd like everybody to learn more, and that's the aim, but I guess really the point I want to get across is that anybody can pick up the tools and start to learn, and should enjoy that. What's really interesting is we're getting students that have no interest in biodiversity, that are just wanting to, so we kind of recognize the link between well-being and health, and the students through the lockdown, rather than kind of saying, oh, well, we can't go on site and we can't monitor, they've been running webinars and sessions, sort of training people how to do monitoring in their garden. So it's kind of keeping people active, and we've got people from all across the university, that are kind of at the moment are sat at home quite bored, but as soon as they're able to get back to work in the office, they're going to now, they've already said they want to get out of the office at lunchtime. So it's giving people an excuse to leave the desk, and it's giving students an opportunity to see the campus in a different way. So it's kind of opened up something that people kind of saw as quite inaccessible before. So I guess the real challenge now is making sure that people can access all of this and that the information's available. But yeah, absolutely, we're getting people from all kinds of disciplines that are interested in this, including the local nursery, the children from the nursery.
So sometimes I wonder if my children will ever get the chance to see some species of animals like white tigers, rhinoceros, some kind of butterflies. And I'm not that old, but only through that a bit more of more than 2 decades, I have heard about not less than 100 species of animals that disappeared. And I'm sure I don't know all of them. And what is sad about that is that nature can only blame humans. So as you said, I lived in 3 different countries, and each time I moved to a new one, there was a higher level of consciousness that I saw among the population about the importance of climate change and the protection of the biodiversity. And that made me realize that the population is the main factor that can really do something about climate change. As the majority of the audience is composed by students, I would like to tell them that they are the best people that can raise awareness about the planet, and that the university is, with no doubt, the best place to educate people on ecological behavior. I think that the most interesting starting point that can be is creating green teams or green clubs, as we have in the company where I work. And if they do this in the university, their main activities would be the promotion of ecological projects, like the reduction of printing, for example. They can encourage digitalization, because you know that printing releases a lot of toxins and a lot of carbon. So I think it would be a great idea to encourage the digitalization. Also, they can encourage the reduction of the use of cars at the campuses, because as I started my studies there, I saw that at the campus we've got like 100 of parkings there, and there are all cars all around the campus. So, and with a lot of carbon emissions, so they can reduce that. What they can also initiate is the replacement of the plastic bags by reusable ones that we can use also for groceries. And you know that this one is might seem obvious to people who live in European countries or the UK, for example, but in Algeria this doesn't exist, and I think it's a very good idea if they start doing this with the logos of the universities, and I'm sure that students will be very proud of holding the bags with university's logo. Then a bigger plan can be to encourage the university to place recycling bins, for example, and also add plants in classroom and amphitheaters. There are thousands of species that are very easy to keep, and those plants might be, as you know, a plant is a whole ecosystem by itself. So this is how they can increase the biodiversity by very simple steps. They can start by cleaning and recycling, as I said in the first part, and then greening the environment. So to conclude, I just want to say that I don't want my children to see beautiful animals and plants only in books, like we learned about dinosaurs. And I'm sure that this generation is powerful one, and I'm confident that they will be able to change things to the better, and they can green Algeria.
This is the UN Decade of Ecosystem Services, so this is a great area for you to look at your research or just engaging with and understanding that, you know, these natural bounties can no longer be seen as, or can never be seen as, a free resource. So we hope you found that interesting and as it inspired you, and I'm really grateful for all those examples of how you in your university actually do have power, you do have influence, and it is your future. So do lead this agenda. It's an exciting one. We all depend on it. So thanks to the panelists. Thanks to everyone at the British Council Algeria and the EAUC, but mostly thanks to you for listening, asking questions, and hopefully being inspired to act to make Algerian universities more green.